The gunshot echoed through the dusty town of Redemption Springs, silencing the murmurs of the gathered crowd as Harriet Langley stood trembling on the wooden platform, her eyes wide with terror and disbelief. It was May 1875, and her life as she knew it had just ended. "I ain't done nothing," she screamed, her voice cracking as the sheriff read the proclamation. "I swear on my mother's grave, I never stole that money." No one in the crowd met her gaze. These were people she'd known her entire life, neighbors she'd baked pies for, children she'd taught their letters, men who'd tipped their hats to her just days before. Now they all stared at their boots, believing Judge Williams' nephew over the word of a seamstress with no family name to protect her. "Harriet Langley," Sheriff Bolton announced, his voice carrying across the town square. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, you are hereby banished from Redemption Springs. You will gather your belongings and be gone by sundown. Any return will result in imprisonment." A sob escaped her lips as she was roughly led down the steps. 26 years old, and everything she'd built was being stripped away because Gregory Williams claimed she'd stolen money from the store where she worked. The wealthy nephew of the judge had pointed his finger, and that was enough. As the crowd dispersed, Harriet felt a presence beside her. She turned to find Owen Reed, a rancher who kept mostly to himself, standing there with his hat in his hands. His weathered face was set in determination beneath a shock of unruly dark hair, his blue eyes meeting hers directly when no one else would. "Miss Langley," he said, his voice low and steady. "I've got a wagon waiting. I'll help you gather your things." Harriet wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "Why would you help me? They'll turn against you too." Owen replaced his hat, shielding his eyes from the harsh sun. "Because I know a lie when I hear one, and what's happening here isn't justice. It's a powerful man crushing someone who can't fight back." She wanted to argue, to tell him to save himself the trouble, but the sun was already starting its westward journey. By nightfall, she needed to be gone from the only home she'd ever known. "I don't have much," she whispered. "Then it won't take long," he replied, offering his arm. The walk to her small rented room above the millinery shop was the longest of her life. Every step felt like walking through quicksand, every familiar sight now tainted with the knowledge she might never see it again. Mrs. Porter, the milliner who had rented her the room for 3 years, couldn't even look at her as she climbed the stairs for the last time. The room was sparse but neat, a testament to Harriet's orderly nature. A small bed with a handmade quilt, a trunk containing her clothes, a rocking chair by the window where she'd spent countless evenings reading or sewing by lamplight. On the wall hung a daguerreotype of her parents, both gone now, her father to the war and her mother to consumption 3 years prior. Owen stood in the doorway as she moved methodically around the room, gathering her possessions. "I never took that money," she said without turning around. "Gregory Williams has been making advances since he arrived in town. When I refused him again last week, he swore I'd regret it." "I believe you," Owen said simply. She paused, a dress halfway folded in her hands. "You're the only one who does. People are scared of crossing the judge and his kin. Doesn't make them right." Harriet placed the last of her belongings in the trunk. It wasn't much, some clothes, her sewing kit, a few books, and the photograph. Everything that remained of her life fit into one small trunk. She looked around the room one last time, touching the windowsill where she'd placed wildflowers in the spring, running her fingers over the faded wallpaper. "I'm ready," she said, though she wasn't. How could anyone be ready for exile? Owen carried her trunk downstairs and loaded it onto his wagon. The sun was lowering in the sky, painting the town in golden hues that belied the darkness of what was happening. A few townspeople watched from windows or porches, their expressions a mixture of pity, judgment, and relief that it wasn't them being driven out. As they climbed onto the wagon seat, Sheriff Bolton approached. "Town limits are that way," he said, pointing west. "I don't want to see you back here, Harriet." "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The sheriff shrugged. "Not my concern. Just be grateful the judge didn't press for jail time." Owen's jaw tightened, but he kept his peace, simply nodding to the sheriff before flicking the reins. The wagon lurched forward, wheels creaking as they began the journey out of town. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythm of the horses' hooves marking time as Redemption Springs grew smaller behind them. Harriet didn't look back. She couldn't bear to watch her home disappear. "I have a cabin," Owen said finally, breaking the silence. "It's about 5 miles outside town near Crystal Creek. You can stay there until you figure out what's next." Harriet turned to him, studying his profile. Owen Reed was something of a mystery in town. He'd arrived about 2 years ago, bought a small ranch, and kept to himself. He came to town for supplies and occasionally a drink at the saloon, but he wasn't one for socializing. Some said he'd fought for the Union. Others claimed he was running from something back east. All Harriet knew was that he was always polite, paid his bills promptly, and now, inexplicably, was the only person willing to stand by her. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again. Owen kept his eyes on the road. "Because someone should." "That's not an answer," he sighed, adjusting his hat. "I've seen what happens when good people do nothing. When I was younger, I watched a man get hanged for something he didn't do because nobody had the courage to speak up. I swore I'd never be that person again." The wagon hit a rut, jostling them both. Harriet gripped the seat to steady herself. "You could lose your standing in town," she warned. "They might turn on you too." A hint of a smile crossed his face. "I don't have much standing to lose, Miss Langley. I keep to myself for a reason." The sun was setting by the time they reached Owen's property. The cabin was modest but well built, situated on a rise overlooking a creek. A barn stood nearby, along with a corral where several horses grazed. It was peaceful, removed from the world in a way that made Harriet's heart ache for what she'd lost. Owen helped her down from the wagon. "It's not much, but it's solid. No leaks when it rains." "It's more than I expected to have tonight," Harriet said, her voice catching. Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable. A main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, a table with 2 chairs. A door led to what she presumed was a bedroom. Everything was neat and organized, if a bit sparse like its owner, she thought. "You'll take the bedroom," Owen said, setting her trunk down. "I'll sleep out here." Harriet shook her head. "I can't put you out of your own bed." "You're not putting me anywhere. I'm offering." His tone left no room for argument. "Are you hungry? I've got some stew I can heat up." She nodded, suddenly aware of the hollow feeling in her stomach. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, before her world had fallen apart. As Owen moved around the kitchen, stoking the fire in the stove and preparing the meal, Harriet stood by the window, watching darkness settle over the land. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, the sound mournful and fitting for her mood. "What am I going to do?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. Owen paused in his work. "You're going to eat, then sleep. Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest. I have nowhere to go, no family, no friends who believed in me. Everything I had was in that town." He set 2 bowls on the table. "You have time to decide. You can stay here as long as you need." They ate in silence, the stew hearty and filling. Harriet hadn't realized how hungry she was until she started eating. When they finished, she insisted on washing the dishes, a small way to repay his kindness. "The bedroom's through there," Owen said, pointing to the door. "There's water in the pitcher if you want to wash up. I'll be out here if you need anything." Harriet nodded, suddenly exhausted. The events of the day crashed over her like a wave, leaving her dizzy with fatigue and grief. The bedroom was as simple as the rest of the cabin: a bed with a quilt, a small dresser, a washstand with a basin and pitcher. She splashed water on her face, changed into her nightgown, and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time since the accusation, she was alone with her thoughts. The tears came then, silent at first, then building to sobs that shook her entire body. She pressed her face into the pillow to muffle the sound, not wanting Owen to hear her breaking apart. Everything she'd worked for, every relationship she'd built, all gone because of one man's lies and a town's willingness to believe the worst. She must have cried herself to sleep, because the next thing she knew, sunlight was streaming through the small window. For a moment, she was disoriented, expecting to see the familiar walls of her room above the millinery. Then reality crashed back, and she remembered. The smell of coffee and bacon drew her from the bedroom after she dressed. Owen was at the stove, his back to her as he tended to breakfast. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Hope you slept all right." "As well as could be expected," she replied, smoothing her dress. It was wrinkled from being packed hastily in her trunk, but it would have to do. "Can I help with breakfast? It's nearly done. Have a seat." Harriet sat at the table, watching him work. In the light of day, she could see him more clearly. Owen was tall and lean, with broad shoulders that spoke of years of physical labor. His dark hair was a bit too long, curling at the nape of his neck, and his face was tanned from working outdoors. She guessed him to be in his early 30s, though the lines around his eyes suggested he'd seen more than his share of hardship. He set a plate in front of her: bacon, eggs, and biscuits along with a cup of coffee. "Eat up. Food helps when you're trying to sort things out." "Thank you," she said, meaning it for more than just the breakfast. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't helped me yesterday." Owen sat across from her with his own plate. "You'd have managed. You strike me as someone who finds a way." "I'm not sure that's true anymore." She took a sip of coffee, the bitter warmth spreading through her. "Everything I thought I knew about myself, about my place in the world, turned out to be wrong." "No," he said firmly. "What happened to you wasn't about who you are, it was about power and who has it. Gregory Williams made a choice to hurt you because he could, and the town made a choice to look the other way because it was easier." Harriet stared at him, surprised by the vehemence in his voice. "You seem to understand it well." Something flashed in his eyes, pain, perhaps, or anger, before he looked down at his plate. "I've seen it before." They ate in silence for a while, the only sounds the clink of utensils and the occasional call of birds outside. "I need to find work," Harriet said finally. "I can't stay here indefinitely." "There's no rush," Owen replied. "The nearest town is Silver Gulch, about 20 miles west, bigger than Redemption Springs. You might find opportunities there." "I can sew," she said, thinking aloud. "I was good at my job despite what Gregory claimed." "Maybe I could find work as a seamstress again." Owen nodded. "Possible, or the hotel might need help. There's a school too if you have any interest in teaching." The thought of starting over was overwhelming. Every option seemed to lead to more questions, more uncertainty. "I should pay you rent," she said suddenly. "If I'm staying here, I should contribute." Owen shook his head. "That's not necessary. It is to me. I won't be a charity case." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but not money. I don't need it. If you want to help around the place, cooking, mending, whatever you're comfortable with, that's payment enough." It wasn't ideal, but it was a compromise she could live with. "Deal." After breakfast, Owen showed her around the property. The barn housed his horses, 4 in total, including the 2 that had pulled the wagon along with his tack and tools. A small vegetable garden grew behind the cabin, and a chicken coop housed a half-dozen hens. It was a self-sufficient operation, modest but well-maintained. "I'll be working with the horses today," he told her. "Make yourself at home. There are books on the shelf if you want to read." Left alone in the cabin, Harriet took stock of her surroundings more carefully. The books on the shelf surprised her, not just practical guides to ranching and survival, but literature as well. Shakespeare, Dickens, Thoreau. She ran her fingers along the spines, wondering about the man who owned them. She spent the morning cleaning the cabin, needing to feel useful. It wasn't particularly dirty, but she scrubbed anyway, working out her frustrations on the floorboards and windows. By midday, the place was spotless, and she'd started an inventory of what supplies they had for cooking. Owen returned for the noon meal, looking surprised at the transformation of his home. "You didn't have to do all this." "I wanted to," she said simply. "I made stew with some of the vegetables from your garden. I hope that's all right." They ate together, and Harriet found herself studying him when he wasn't looking. There was a quietness to Owen that she found intriguing. He didn't feel the need to fill silence with chatter, but when he did speak, his words carried weight. Days passed in this manner, falling into a routine of sorts. Harriet took over the cooking and household tasks, while Owen tended to the ranch. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes reading, sometimes talking. She learned that he had indeed fought in the war, serving with the Union cavalry. He'd come west afterward, looking for a fresh start away from the memories of battle. "What about you?" he asked one evening, about a week after her arrival. "How did you end up in Redemption Springs?" Harriet was mending one of his shirts, her needle flashing in the firelight. "I was born there. My father owned the general store before the war. When he didn't come back, my mother kept it going as long as she could, but her health was never strong." We sold it when I was 16 and I started working for the new owners. After she died, I stayed on, took the room above the millinery, and that was my life until. She trailed off, the memory of her banishment still raw. Until Gregory Williams decided he was entitled to more than you were willing to give. Owen finished for her. Harriet nodded, jabbing her needle with more force than necessary. He arrived in town 6 months ago, all Eastern polish and family connections. The judge's precious nephew, come to learn the business of the West. At first he was just overly friendly, then the gifts started little things left at the store for me. When I returned them, he became more insistent, said a woman in my position shouldn't be so choosy. Her hands stilled in her lap. The last time he cornered me in the storeroom, said no one would believe me if I complained that his uncle owned half the town. I slapped him and told him I'd rather die alone than be with a man like him. 3 days later, Mr. Peterson accused me of stealing from the cash box on Gregory's word. Owen's expression darkened. Men like that don't stop at one victim. No, she agreed. They don't. The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that, but something had changed between them. A trust had formed, born of shared confidences and quiet companionship. 2 weeks after her arrival, Owen announced that he needed to go into Silver Gulch for supplies. Would you like to come? He asked. Might do you good to see something beyond these 4 walls. Harriet hesitated. The thought of facing strangers, of potentially having to explain her situation, filled her with dread, but she couldn't hide forever. Yes, she decided. I'll come. They set out early the next morning, the wagon loaded with goods to trade eggs, vegetables from the garden, a pair of boots Owen had outgrown. The journey took most of the morning, winding through rolling hills and stands of pine. It was beautiful country, Harriet had to admit, so different from the more settled landscape around Redemption Springs. Silver Gulch was indeed larger than her former home, a bustling town that had grown up around mining interests. The main street was lined with businesses, a hotel, several saloons, a dry goods store, even a small theater. People moved about with purpose, paying little attention to the new arrivals. Owen parked the wagon in front of the general store. I'll handle the trading. Why don't you look around, get a feel for the place? Harriet nodded, suddenly nervous about being on her own. I won't go far. She walked slowly down the boardwalk, taking in the sights and sounds of the town. It was both familiar and foreign, the same frontier businesses she knew, but populated by strangers. No one here knew her story, she realized. No one was judging her based on lies. A sign in a window caught her eye. Seamstress wanted inquire within. She stopped, staring at it. The shop was a dressmaker's, finer than anything Redemption Springs had boasted. Through the window, she could see elegant gowns displayed on forms. Before she could talk herself out of it, Harriet pushed open the door. A bell tinkled overhead, announcing her arrival. A middle-aged woman looked up from where she was measuring fabric at a large cutting table. Can I help you? She asked, her tone businesslike but not unfriendly. I saw your sign, Harriet said, gesturing to the window, about needing a seamstress. The woman looked her up and down. You have experience. Yes, madam. I worked at Peterson's General Store in Redemption Springs for 10 years, handling all the mending and custom orders. Redemption Springs. The woman frowned. Small place, isn't it? Why'd you leave? The question she'd been dreading. Harriet took a deep breath. There was a misunderstanding. I was accused of something I didn't do. To her surprise, the woman nodded, seeming unsurprised. Happens more than you'd think, especially to women on their own. Can you show me your work? Harriet hadn't brought any samples, but she pointed to her own dress. I made this. It's simple, but the stitching is even. I can do fancier work too, embroidery, smocking, whatever's needed. The woman came closer, examining the seams of Harriet's dress with a professional eye. Not bad, I'm Mrs. Fleming, this is my shop. My last girl left to get married, and I've more orders than I can handle alone. I'm Harriet Langley. Mrs. Fleming nodded. The job pays $3 a week to start, more if you prove yourself. Hours are long during busy seasons. I provide room and board. There's a small apartment above the shop. When can you start? Harriet blinked, caught off guard by the straightforward offer. I need to discuss it with someone first. I'm staying with a friend at the moment. The tall fellow you rode in with, Mrs. Fleming smiled knowingly. Saw you from the window. Husband? No, Harriet said quickly. Just a friend who helped me when I needed it. Hum. Mrs. Fleming didn't look convinced. Well, the position is open if you want it. Let me know by the end of the week. I need someone soon. Harriet left the shop with her mind racing. A job, a place to live, a fresh start, it was more than she dared hope for. But the thought of leaving Owen's cabin, of being on her own in a strange town, filled her with unexpected sadness. She found him loading supplies into the wagon, having completed his trading. When he saw her, he smiled, a rare full smile that transformed his serious face. Good timing, he said. I'm nearly done here. I found a job, she blurted out. At the dressmaker's, she needs a seamstress. Owen's smile faded slightly, but he nodded. That's good news. When do you start? I haven't accepted yet. I told her I needed to discuss it first. He secured the last crate in the wagon. Not much to discuss. It's what you wanted, isn't it? A chance to be independent again. Yes, but... Harriet hesitated, not sure how to express the conflict she was feeling. It's all happening so fast. Owen's expression softened. You don't have to decide right now. Think on it during the ride back. The journey home was quieter than the trip out, both of them lost in their thoughts. The sun was setting by the time they reached the cabin, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. As they unloaded the wagon, Owen finally broke the silence. You should take the job. Harriet paused, a sack of flour in her arms. You want me to leave? No, he said quickly. That's not it. But you came to me because you had nowhere else to go. Now you have options, a real chance to rebuild. And what about you? She asked, setting the flour down on the porch. You'll just go back to living alone as if I was never here. Something flickered in his eyes, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. I managed before. That's not what I asked. Owen ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. What do you want me to say, Harriet? That I've gotten used to having you here? That the cabin feels more like a home with you in it. It's true, but it doesn't change the facts. You deserve a fresh start, not to be hidden away on a ranch with a man who can barely carry on a proper conversation. The raw honesty of his words stunned her. I don't feel hidden here, she said softly. I feel safe. For the first time since that day in town, I feel like I can breathe. Owen's expression was pained. Safety isn't enough for a life. You need more people, opportunities, a future. And I can't have those things here, with me, you mean? He shook his head. I don't have anything to offer you, Harriet. I'm just a rancher with a past I'd rather forget and not much to show for my years. Harriet stepped closer to him, her heart pounding. You offered me kindness when no one else would. You believed me when everyone else called me a liar. That's worth more than you know. For a moment, she thought he might reach for her. Instead, he turned away, picking up another crate from the wagon. Think about the job. It's a good opportunity. That night, Harriet lay awake in bed, turning the decision over in her mind. The job with Mrs. Fleming offered independence, a chance to prove herself again. But the thought of leaving the cabin, of not seeing Owen each day, created an ache in her chest she couldn't ignore. She'd grown fond of him, more than fond if she was honest with herself. There was a steadiness to Owen, a quiet strength that drew her to him, but he seemed determined to push her toward a life in town, away from him. Morning came with no resolution. They ate breakfast in unusual silence, the tension between them palpable. As Owen prepared to head out to work with the horses, Harriet made her decision. I'm going to take the job, she said. Owen nodded, his face carefully blank. When will you go? Mrs. Fleming said by the end of the week. I thought maybe Friday. It was Wednesday now, giving her 2 more days at the cabin. I'll take you into town, he said. Make sure you get settled properly. Thank you. He headed for the door, then paused. It's the right choice, Harriet. You'll see that in time. After he left, Harriet began gathering her few possessions, preparing for the move. As she folded her clothes, she found herself lingering over the task, reluctant to pack away the life she'd built here. Brief though it was, by Friday morning, her trunk was packed and waiting by the door. The cabin felt different somehow, as if it already knew she was leaving. Owen was quieter than usual as they loaded her things onto the wagon. The journey to Silver Gulch stretched before them, 20 miles of time together before they would part ways. Harriet searched for words to fill the silence, to express what these weeks had meant to her, but everything she thought to say seemed inadequate. I never thanked you properly, she said finally, as the town came into view on the horizon. For everything you did for me. Owen kept his eyes on the road. No thanks needed. Anyone would have done the same. No, she said firmly. They wouldn't have. The entire town of Redemption Springs proved that. He glanced at her, then back to the road. You're going to do well here, Harriet. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. Because of you, she said softly, you helped me remember who I am. They reached the dressmaker's shop just after noon. Mrs. Fleming was pleased to see her, showing Harriet to the small apartment above the store, a tidy space with a bed, a table and chair, and a small stove. It was functional, if not homey. Owen carried her trunk up the narrow stairs, setting it at the foot of the bed. He looked around the room, his expression unreadable. It's nice, he said, though his tone lacked conviction. You'll be comfortable here. Yes, Harriet agreed, though the room felt cold and impersonal after the warmth of his cabin. They stood awkwardly, neither quite ready to say goodbye. Finally, Owen reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. I wanted you to have this, he said, placing it in her hand. A housewarming gift, I suppose. Harriet unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a small wooden carving of a bird, a sparrow, she thought delicately crafted and polished to a shine. It's beautiful, she whispered. Did you make this? Owen nodded, looking embarrassed. Whittling passes the time on winter evenings. It's nothing fancy. It's perfect. She ran her finger over the smooth wood. I didn't know you could carve. There's a lot we don't know about each other, he said quietly. Maybe that's for the best. The words stung, though she knew he hadn't meant them to. Will you visit? When you come to town for supplies, he hesitated. If you want me to, I do. Owen looked around the room once more, as if committing it to memory. I should go, let you get settled. Harriet nodded, though everything in her wanted to ask him to stay. Thank you again, Owen, for everything. He tipped his hat. Take care of yourself, Harriet Langley. And then he was gone, his footsteps fading down the stairs. Harriet sat on the edge of the bed, the carved bird clutched in her hand, listening to the sounds of his wagon pulling away. She was on her own now, just as she'd wanted. So why did it feel like she'd made a terrible mistake? The first week at Mrs. Fleming's passed in a blur of activity. The work was familiar and satisfying, measuring customers, cutting patterns, stitching garments with care. Mrs. Fleming was a fair employer, exacting in her standards but generous with praise when it was deserved. The apartment gradually became more personal as Harriet added small touches, wildflowers in a jar on the table, her parents' photograph on the wall, Owen's carved bird on the windowsill where the morning light caught it. She made acquaintances in town, the baker whose shop she passed each morning, the librarian who helped her find books to read in her spare time, other shopkeepers who nodded in greeting when she walked by. But nights were the hardest. Alone in her small room, she found herself missing the sounds of the ranch, the distant nickering of horses, the wind in the pines, even Owen's footsteps as he moved about the cabin. She missed their quiet conversations by the fire, the comfortable silences, the feeling of being truly seen for who she was. 2 weeks after her move, Harriet was working late, finishing a rush order for a wealthy customer, when Mrs. Fleming came up from the shop. There's someone here to see you, she said, a knowing smile on her face. A tall fellow with a hat in his hands, looking like he'd rather face a firing squad than ask for you by name. Harriet's heart leaped. Owen, that's the one. Shall I send him up? She nodded, suddenly conscious of her appearance, hair escaping its pins, apron smudged with chalk from marking patterns. Yes, please. Mrs. Fleming disappeared, and moments later, Owen's familiar figure filled the doorway. He stood awkwardly, hat in hands as Mrs. Fleming had described, looking both out of place and exactly where Harriet wanted him to be. I was in town for supplies, he said by way of explanation. Thought I'd see how you were settling in. I'm well, she said, gesturing for him to enter. Please come in, sit down. He took the offered chair, placing his hat on the table. His eyes moved around the room, taking in the changes she'd made, lingering on the carved bird in the window. The work is good, she told him, filling the silence. Mrs. Fleming is teaching me new techniques for fancy dressmaking. I've met some nice people in town. Everyone's been welcoming. Owen nodded. I'm glad to hear it. "How are things at the ranch?" she asked, desperate to keep him talking, to hear his voice. "The same," he said. "Quiet," he paused. "Too quiet if I'm being honest." The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. Harriet's hands twisted in her lap. "I miss it," she confessed, "more than I expected to." Owen's eyes met hers, a question in their depths. "The ranch and you," she said softly. "I miss our talks. I miss feeling like I belonged somewhere." He looked down at his hands. "I told myself I was doing the right thing, encouraging you to take this job, that you needed to stand on your own, not depend on me." "I am standing on my own," Harriet said. "I'm earning my way, building a life here. But that doesn't mean I can't wish for more." "What more do you wish for?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Before she could answer, there was a commotion from downstairs, raised voices, the sound of something breaking. Owen was on his feet immediately, positioning himself between Harriet and the door. "Stay here," he said, all softness gone from his voice. He moved to the top of the stairs, Harriet close behind despite his warning. From below came the sound of Mrs. Fleming's angry voice. "You're not welcome in my shop. Get out before I call the sheriff," a male voice responded, slurred with drink but chillingly familiar to Harriet. "I'm just looking for someone. Been told she's working here now." Gregory Williams. Harriet's blood ran cold. Owen turned to her, his expression grim. "Stay here," he repeated, more firmly this time. He descended the stairs, his footsteps measured and deliberate. Harriet crept forward, peering down into the shop below. Gregory stood swaying slightly in the middle of the store, a broken vase at his feet. Mrs. Fleming was behind the counter, a scissors clutched in her hand like a weapon. And now Owen stood at the foot of the stairs, his posture deceptively relaxed but his eyes hard. "Store's closed," Owen said calmly. "Time for you to leave." Gregory squinted at him. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who thinks a man ought to respect a lady's wishes. Mrs. Fleming asked you to go." Gregory sneered. "I'm not looking for the old woman. I'm looking for Harriet Langley. Word is she's working here now." "There's no one here by that name," Owen lied smoothly. "Now, I won't ask you again. Leave before this gets unpleasant." Something in Owen's tone must have penetrated Gregory's alcohol-fogged brain because he took a step back. "You're lying. I know she's here." "And if she was," Owen said, taking a step forward, "what business would you have with her?" "Haven't you done enough damage?" Gregory's eyes narrowed. "You know about that. Then you know she's a thief. Stole money from Peterson's store back in Redemption Springs." "That's a lie," Harriet said, unable to stay silent any longer. She came down the stairs, ignoring Owen's warning look. "And you know it's a lie, Gregory. You planted that money in my things after I refused your advances." Gregory's face twisted with anger. "You ungrateful bitch. I offered to take care of you, to give you a position above your station, and you threw it in my face." "You offered to make me your mistress," Harriet corrected, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "And when I refused, you destroyed my reputation and had me banished from my home." Mrs. Fleming looked between them, understanding dawning on her face. "This is the misunderstanding you mentioned," Harriet nodded, not taking her eyes off Gregory. "He's the judge's nephew in Redemption Springs. His word was enough to convict me without evidence." "Not here it isn't," Mrs. Fleming said firmly. "Sheriff Barnes doesn't care about family connections. He cares about the law." Gregory laughed, an ugly sound. "The law? I am the law in Redemption Springs. My uncle made sure of that." "You're not in Redemption Springs anymore," Owen pointed out. "And from where I'm standing, you're trespassing in a lady's place of business after hours. That's enough to spend a night in jail in most towns." A flash of uncertainty crossed Gregory's face, quickly replaced by bravado. "You think I'm afraid of some backwater sheriff? Do you know who my family is? I don't care if your uncle is the president himself," Owen said, his patience visibly wearing thin. "You're leaving now, one way or another." Gregory took a step toward Harriet, but Owen was faster, placing himself between them. "That's close enough." "Get out of my way," Gregory snarled. "This doesn't concern you." "She concerns me," Owen said simply. "And that makes it my business." Gregory's hand moved toward his coat, and Harriet saw a flash of metal, a derringer, small but deadly at close range. Before she could cry out a warning, Owen moved, faster than she would have thought possible. His fist connected with Gregory's jaw, sending the smaller man sprawling across the floor. The gun clattered away, sliding under a display table. Gregory lay stunned, blood trickling from his split lip. Owen stood over him, not even breathing hard. "That was a mistake," Owen said quietly. "A man who pulls a gun should be prepared to use it, and a man who uses it should be prepared to die by it." Gregory spat blood onto the floor. "You'll regret this." "When my uncle hears, your uncle isn't here," Mrs. Fleming interrupted, having retrieved the derringer from under the table. She held it with surprising competence. "But Sheriff Barnes will be soon enough. I sent my assistant to fetch him the moment you walked in. Something about you didn't sit right with me." As if on cue, the shop door opened, and a broad-shouldered man with a star on his chest entered, followed by a deputy. He surveyed the scene with experienced eyes. "Evening, Mrs. Fleming. Got your message. What seems to be the trouble here, Mrs.?" Fleming explained the situation succinctly, from Gregory's unwelcome arrival to the attempted drawing of the weapon. Sheriff Barnes listened, occasionally glancing between Gregory, still on the floor, and Owen, who had stepped back but remained vigilant. "Is this true, miss?" The sheriff asked Harriet. She nodded. "Every word. He had me banished from Redemption Springs on false charges because I refused his advances. Now he's followed me here." Barnes turned to Gregory. "Get up, son, slowly. You're spending the night in my jail while I sort this out." Gregory struggled to his feet, his fine clothes now dusty and rumpled. "You can't do this. My uncle isn't the law in Silver Gulch," Barnes finished for him. "I am, and I don't take kindly to men who threaten women in my town." The deputy handcuffed Gregory and led him away, still protesting about his family connections. Sheriff Barnes remained behind, addressing Owen. "You the one who hit him?" Owen nodded. "He was reaching for his gun. I reacted." Barnes studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Seems reasonable. I'll need statements from all of you tomorrow, but for now, I think we're done here." He tipped his hat to the women. "Ladies, try to have a better evening than you've had so far." After the sheriff left, Mrs. Fleming let out a long breath. "Well, that was more excitement than I bargained for when I hired you, Harriet." "I'm so sorry," Harriet began, but Mrs. Fleming waved her apology away. "Nonsense. Not your fault some men can't take no for an answer. Besides, gave me a chance to pull out this old thing." She held up the derringer with a grim smile. "Husband left it to me when he passed. First time I've had cause to use it." She looked between Harriet and Owen, her expression softening. "Why don't you two go back upstairs? I'll lock up down here. Been a long day for all of us." Back in her apartment, Harriet sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. Owen remained standing, looking uncertain now that the immediate danger had passed. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded. "Thanks to you, again." He might have been bluffing about the gun. "We both know he wasn't." Harriet looked up at him. "How did you move so fast?" A shadow crossed Owen's face. "War teaches you things, how to recognize when a man's about to draw, how to be faster than him." "He'll be back," she said quietly, "when the sheriff releases him." Gregory isn't the type to let this go. Owen sat beside her on the bed, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "Then we'll deal with it. You're not alone in this, Harriet." "I was supposed to be standing on my own by now," she said, with a hint of bitterness. "That's why I took this job, why I left your cabin, to prove I could be independent again." "Standing on your own doesn't mean standing alone," Owen said gently. "It means making your own choices, living on your own terms. It doesn't mean having no one to turn to when you need help." Harriet looked at him, really looked at him, at the steady blue eyes that had believed in her when no one else would, at the strong hands that had helped her rebuild her life, at the quiet strength that had become her foundation. "What I wish for," she said, answering his earlier question, "is to find a way to stand on my own without losing what we found together." Owen's breath caught. "And what did we find?" "Understanding. Trust." She hesitated, then added softly, "The beginning of something I've never felt before." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "I told myself I was doing the right thing by encouraging you to leave, that you needed a fresh start away from memories of what happened, away from a lonely rancher with too many ghosts of his own." "You were wrong," she said simply. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Wouldn't be the first time." "What do we do now?" Harriet asked. "Gregory knows where I am. Even if the sheriff runs him out of town, he could come back, or send word to Redemption Springs." Owen's expression grew serious again. First, we make sure you're safe. I can stay in town tonight, get a room at the hotel, and tomorrow, we give our statements to the sheriff after that." He paused. "After that, it's your choice, Harriet. What do you want?" The question hung between them, heavy with possibility. Harriet thought of the life she was building in Silver Gulch, the work she enjoyed, the independence she'd craved. She thought of Owen's ranch, the peace she'd found there, the connection that had grown between them. "I want both," she said finally. "My work here and whatever this is between us, is that possible?" Owen's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "Silver Gulch is only 20 miles from the ranch, not so far with a good horse. You'd be willing to make that ride, to court me properly." His eyes held hers. "I'd ride twice that distance for the chance to see you, to see where this might lead." Harriet felt something unfurl in her chest, hope, warm and bright. "Then that's what we'll do. I'll keep working for Mrs. Fleming, building my independence. And you'll come to town when you can. And perhaps," Owen said cautiously, "sometimes you might visit the ranch on your days off if you wanted to. I'd like that very much." The tension of the evening ebbed away, replaced by a tentative joy. Whatever came next, Gregory's threats, the whispers that might follow them, the challenges of building something together while maintaining their separate lives, they would face it together. Owen stayed in town that night, as he'd promised, though not at the hotel. Mrs. Fleming, with a practicality that bordered on scandalous, insisted he sleep on the small sofa in Harriet's apartment. "Better than leaving her alone after what happened," she said firmly. "Propriety be damned. The girl needs protection tonight." And so they spent the night under the same roof once more, though with Mrs. Fleming's apartment between them as chaperone. In the morning, they gave their statements to Sheriff Barnes, who informed them that Gregory Williams would be escorted to the edge of town and warned not to return. "Can't hold him longer without formal charges," Barnes explained. "And neither of you wants to go through a trial, I expect. Messy business, especially with his family connections." "What's to stop him from coming back?" Harriet asked. The sheriff smiled grimly. "Let's just say I've made it clear that his uncle's influence doesn't extend to my jurisdiction, and that Silver Gulch takes a dim view of men who threaten its citizens, no matter who their relatives might be. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was something." As they left the sheriff's office, Owen turned to Harriet. "I should head back to the ranch. The horses need tending, and I've been away longer than planned." She nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "When will I see you again?" "Sunday," he said without hesitation. "I'll come for you in the morning if that suits. Maybe we could have a picnic by the creek near the ranch if you'd like that." "I would," she said, smiling. "Very much." He reached for her hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. "Until Sunday, then." Watching him ride away was difficult but different from their last parting. This time, she knew he would return. This time they were choosing each other, not circumstances forcing them together. The next few weeks settled into a new pattern. Owen rode into town every Sunday, taking Harriet on outings, picnics by the creek, rides through the hills, once even to a traveling show that had set up outside town. On her day off each month, she would visit the ranch, helping with the garden or simply sitting on the porch, watching the sunset with him. Their courtship was unconventional, bridging two worlds: her growing independence in town and his solitary life on the ranch. But it worked for them, allowing Harriet to build her confidence while their connection deepened. Gregory Williams did not return to Silver Gulch, though Harriet often found herself glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see him lurking in the shadows. The fear faded with time, replaced by a growing certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. 3 months after she'd taken the job with Mrs. Fleming, Harriet was working late again, finishing a wedding dress for the banker's daughter. The bell above the shop door jingled, and she looked up, expecting to see Mrs. Fleming returning from her dinner. Instead, Sheriff Barnes stood in the doorway, his expression grave. "Miss Langley," he said, removing his hat. "I need to speak with you. It's about Owen Reed." Harriet's heart stuttered. "What's happened? Is he hurt?" "Not exactly," Barnes hesitated. "There's been some trouble. A man from Redemption Springs came to my office today, claiming Reed attacked someone there. Judge Williams has issued a warrant for his arrest." The room seemed to tilt beneath her feet. That's impossible. Owen's been at his ranch all week. I saw him on Sunday. The alleged incident happened yesterday, Barnes said. According to this fellow name of Peterson, said he owns the general store. Reed rode into town, confronted Gregory Williams in the saloon, and beat him badly enough to require a doctor's attention. It's a lie, Harriet said firmly. Owen wouldn't do that. And he certainly wouldn't leave his ranch unattended to ride all the way to Redemption Springs. Barnes nodded. I figured as much. That's why I came to you first instead of riding out to arrest him. Something about this stinks worse than week-old fish. What do we do? Harriet asked, fear coiling in her stomach. Judge Williams has power in Redemption Springs if he wants Owen arrested. Judge Williams has no authority in my jurisdiction, Barnes reminded her. But this is serious. If Reed can prove he was at his ranch yesterday, that would help. Any witnesses who saw him? Harriet thought frantically. The feed store in North Fork. He mentioned he was going there yesterday to buy supplies. The owner would remember him. North Fork's only 10 miles from here. I can send my deputy to check. Barnes replaced his hat. In the meantime, someone should warn Reed. They might send men after him. I'll go, Harriet said immediately, already reaching for her shawl. I know the way, Barnes frowned. It'll be dark soon, not safe for a woman to ride alone. I'll be fine, I know those trails now. She hesitated. Can you lend me a horse? Mine's at the livery and that would take too long. The sheriff studied her for a moment, then nodded. My deputy's horse is out front. Take him, he's steady and fast. I'll explain to Mrs. Fleming where you've gone. Harriet didn't wait for further discussion. She hurried outside, mounted the deputy's horse, and set off toward Owen's ranch at a gallop, fear driving her forward into the gathering dusk. The ride seemed endless, each mile stretching before her as her mind raced with possibilities. What if men from Redemption Springs reached Owen before she did? What if they didn't care about proof or justice, only carrying out the judge's orders? Relief flooded her when she finally saw the cabin, a light glowing in the window against the darkness. She urged the horse faster, calling out as soon as she was within earshot. Owen, Owen, are you there? The cabin door flew open and Owen stood silhouetted against the light, rifle in hand. When he recognized her, his expression shifted from wariness to concern. Harriet, what's wrong? He set the rifle aside and hurried to help her dismount. She practically fell into his arms, breathless from the hard ride and the fear that had driven her. Sheriff Barnes came to the shop. Judge Williams has issued a warrant for your arrest. They're saying you attacked Gregory in Redemption Springs yesterday. Owen's brow furrowed. What? I haven't been to Redemption Springs since the day I helped you leave. I know that, Harriet said, clutching his arm, but Peterson came to Silver Gulch with the warrant. They're trying to frame you, Owen. He led her inside, where a fire burned in the hearth and a half-eaten meal sat on the table. The familiar sight of the cabin calmed her somewhat, though danger still lurked outside. Tell me everything, Barnes said, Owen instructed, pouring her a cup of coffee. Harriet repeated the sheriff's information, watching Owen's expression grow darker with each detail. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. It's a trap, he said finally. They couldn't get to you directly after what happened in Silver Gulch, so they're trying to get to me instead. They know I'd protect you. Sheriff Barnes doesn't believe it, Harriet assured him. He's sending his deputy to North Fork to confirm you were buying supplies there yesterday. Owen nodded. The feed store owner will remember me. I spent half the morning there waiting for my order to be filled. He paused. But that might not be enough to satisfy Judge Williams. He's not interested in the truth. What do we do? Harriet asked the same question she'd posed to the sheriff. Owen came to sit beside her at the table, taking her hands in his. First, you stay here tonight. It's too dangerous for you to ride back to town in the dark. I'll keep watch in case anyone comes. And tomorrow. Tomorrow, we ride to Silver Gulch together. I'll speak with Barnes, see what he suggests. Owen's thumb traced the line of her palm, a gesture that had become familiar and comforting. This isn't just about me, Harriet. It's about us. They're trying to separate us to punish you by hurting me. The realization struck her with cold clarity. Because you stood by me when no one else would. And I'd do it again, he said firmly. Every time, tears pricked at her eyes. I never wanted to bring this trouble to your door. If I had just left that day, gone somewhere else, don't, Owen interrupted gently. Don't ever regret coming into my life. These past months, even with all the complications, have been the happiest I've known since before the war. The simple honesty of his words silenced her protests. Instead, she leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. For me too. They stayed that way for a long moment, drawing strength from each other's presence. Finally, Owen pulled back, his expression resolute. Get some rest. I'll keep watch tonight. Harriet shook her head. I'm not leaving you alone. We'll watch together. He looked like he might argue, then nodded, a hint of a smile touching his lips. Stubborn woman, you knew that when you decided to court me. The night passed slowly, both of them dozing in shifts while the other kept vigil. Dawn found them tired but untroubled by visitors, a small mercy that allowed them to prepare for the journey to Silver Gulch with clear heads. They rode side by side, alert for any sign of pursuit. The countryside was peaceful in the morning light, giving no indication of the threat hanging over them. Silver Gulch was just waking up when they arrived, shopkeepers opening their doors and early risers heading to the cafe for breakfast. They rode directly to the sheriff's office where Barnes was waiting with his deputy. Reed, the sheriff greeted them. Glad to see you made it safely. Miss Langley too. Any news? Harriet asked, dismounting. Barnes nodded. Jim here rode to North Fork last night. The feed store owner confirmed Reed was there all morning yesterday, and several other witnesses saw him on the road between there and his ranch in the afternoon. Relief washed over Harriet. So the warrant is invalid. It's based on false testimony, Barnes agreed. But that doesn't mean Judge Williams will withdraw it. He'll claim the witnesses are mistaken or lying. Owen, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. What do you suggest, Sheriff? Barnes sighed, rubbing his chin. Legally, I should hold you until this is sorted out. But I'm not inclined to lock up an innocent man based on obviously false charges. He paused. There might be another way to handle this, a more permanent solution to your problem. I'm listening, Owen said. Judge Williams has power in Redemption Springs because he owns half the town and has connections to the territorial governor. But even he can't ignore the law completely. Barnes leaned against his desk. What if we brought him evidence that his nephew was lying not just about you allegedly attacking him, but about the original theft that got Miss Langley banished? Harriet shook her head. That's impossible. It's been months. Any evidence is long gone. Maybe not, the sheriff said. Peterson, the store owner who brought the warrant, he seemed nervous. Like a man forced into something he's not comfortable with. I got the feeling he might know more than he's saying. Owen's expression sharpened. You think he might admit the truth? That Gregory planted the evidence against Harriet, with the right persuasion, Barnes said carefully. Not violence, he added quickly. But if he thought coming clean might be safer than continuing to lie for the Williams family, well, people have been known to change their stories. It was a dangerous gamble. If Peterson refused to cooperate, they would be no better off and might be worse if Judge Williams discovered their attempt to discredit his nephew. It's worth trying, Harriet decided. I won't spend my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for Gregory's next move. And I won't let Owen pay the price for standing by me. Owen looked at her with a mixture of pride and concern. If we do this, we do it together. I'm not leaving you unprotected, Barnes nodded. Peterson's staying at the hotel, said he was heading back to Redemption Springs this afternoon. If we're going to approach him, it needs to be soon. They formulated a plan quickly. Barnes would summon Peterson to his office under the pretense of discussing the warrant. Harriet would be present, though hidden from view initially. Owen would wait nearby, ready to intervene if needed but out of sight to avoid complicating the situation. An hour later, the plan was in motion. Harriet sat in Barnes' private office, the door ajar just enough to hear the conversation in the main room. Owen was positioned outside the building, watching through a window, and Peterson, looking nervous and uncomfortable, sat across from Sheriff Barnes. I don't understand why we need to discuss this further, Peterson was saying. I gave you the warrant. Your duty is to execute it. Barnes leaned back in his chair. My duty is to uphold the law, Mr. Peterson, and the law requires evidence before I arrest a man, especially when I have reliable witnesses placing him nowhere near the scene of the alleged crime. Peterson shifted in his seat. "Are you calling me a liar, Sheriff?" "I'm saying someone is lying," Barnes replied calmly. "And I don't think it's my witnesses. I think it's Gregory Williams, and I think you know it." Peterson's face paled. "You don't understand. Judge Williams has no authority here," Barnes finished for him. "But I do. And I'm very interested in knowing why a respectable businessman like yourself would risk his reputation by giving false testimony." Silence fell. Harriet held her breath, straining to hear what Peterson would say next. "It wasn't my idea," the storekeeper said finally, his voice barely audible. "Gregory came to me yesterday with his face already bruised, said I needed to swear I saw Reed do it, or the judge would call in the loans on my store." "And the original theft," Barnes pressed, "the one that got Harriet Langley banished from town, was that a lie too?" Peterson's shoulders slumped. "I never believed she took that money. Harriet worked for me for years, honest as the day is long, but Gregory insisted and the judge backed him. What was I supposed to do? They own the bank that holds my mortgage." It was the confession Harriet had been waiting months to hear. She pushed the door open, stepping into the main office with her head held high. "You let them destroy my life," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion churning inside her. "You knew I was innocent, but you said nothing." Peterson looked up, shock written across his face. "Harriet, I didn't know you were here. Would it have made a difference?" she asked. "If you'd known I would hear your confession, would you have told the truth sooner?" He had the grace to look ashamed. "I'm sorry, I was a coward." "Yes," she agreed, "you were, but you can make it right now." Barnes leaned forward. "I need your statement in writing, Peterson. Every detail how Gregory Williams fabricated charges against Miss Langley, how he coerced you into false testimony against Reed. With that evidence, we can approach the territorial governor. Even Judge Williams can't ignore an official investigation." Peterson hesitated, weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. "I'll do it, but the judge will ruin me." "Maybe," Barnes acknowledged. "Or maybe you'll find there are more people in Redemption Springs willing to stand against him once someone takes the first step." As Peterson began dictating his statement to the deputy, Owen slipped into the office. He moved to Harriet's side, his presence solid and reassuring. "You did it," he murmured. "You stood your ground and got the truth." She shook her head. "We did it, together." The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. With Peterson's signed confession, Sheriff Barnes traveled to the territorial capital to present the evidence to the governor. An investigation was launched into Judge Williams' abuse of power, not just in Harriet's case, but in numerous other instances throughout his jurisdiction. Harriet continued her work at Mrs. Fleming's, though now she spent most weekends at Owen's ranch. Their courtship deepened, no longer shadowed by the fear of Gregory's retaliation. Owen expanded his cabin, adding a second bedroom and enlarging the main room, though he never explicitly stated his reasons for the improvements. 4 months after Peterson's confession, news reached Silver Gulch that Judge Williams had been removed from the bench. Gregory had fled the territory, reportedly heading east to avoid the scandal. Redemption Springs was slowly recovering from the Williams family's influence, with new leadership emerging among the townspeople. On a crisp October morning, Harriet stood on the porch of Owen's cabin, their cabin now, in all but name, watching the sunrise paint the hills in gold and crimson. She heard his footsteps behind her, felt his arms wrap around her waist as he pulled her against his chest. "Beautiful morning," he murmured against her hair. She agreed, leaning into his embrace. "Perfect for a ride. I thought we might go to that ridge you showed me last month, the one with the view of the valley." Owen was quiet for a moment, his breath warm against her neck. "I had something else in mind for today." There was an unusual note in his voice that made Harriet turn in his arms to face him. "What is it?" His eyes, those steady blue eyes that had believed in her when no one else would, held a vulnerability she rarely saw. "I've been thinking about the future, our future." Harriet's heart quickened. "Have you now? You've stood on your own," he said softly. "Built a life, proved your strength to anyone who doubted it, including yourself." She nodded, her throat suddenly tight with emotion. "I promised myself I wouldn't ask until I was sure you were ready, until you didn't need me to stand beside you anymore." Owen took her hands in his. "But the truth is, I don't want to stand beside you out of necessity. I want to stand with you out of choice, for the rest of our lives." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, not a ring, as she might have expected, but the carved wooden sparrow he had given her months ago, now hanging from a delicate silver chain. "I couldn't afford a proper engagement ring yet," he explained, looking slightly embarrassed. "But I thought, if you said yes, you could wear this until I could get you one." Tears blurred Harriet's vision. "Are you asking me to marry you, Owen Reed?" "I am," he confirmed, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in his eyes. "I'm asking if you'll build a life with me not because you need me, but because we're better together than apart." Harriet reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines that spoke of hardship and kindness in equal measure. "I stopped needing you months ago," she said softly. "But I never stopped wanting you. Yes, Owen, yes, I'll marry you." The joy that transformed his face was answer enough, but he sealed the promise with a kiss tender at first, then deepening with all the emotion they'd held in check for so long. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Owen fastened the carved sparrow around her neck. "It's perfect," Harriet said, touching the wooden bird where it rested against her collarbone. "Better than any diamond. One day you'll have both," he promised. "But for now, we have everything that matters," she finished for him. They were married 2 weeks later in Silver Gulch's small church, with Mrs. Fleming, Sheriff Barnes, and a handful of friends in attendance. Harriet wore a dress she'd made herself, simple but elegant, with the wooden sparrow still hanging around her neck. Owen had purchased a new suit for the occasion, looking both handsome and slightly uncomfortable in the formal attire. Their vows were straightforward, but heartfelt promises to stand by each other in all circumstances, to build a life of honesty and respect, to cherish the bond that had formed between them in the darkest of times. As winter settled over the land, Harriet divided her time between the ranch and Silver Gulch, maintaining her position at Mrs. Fleming's while gradually transitioning to life as Owen's wife. They converted part of the expanded cabin into a sewing room where she could work on special commissions from home. Spring brought news from Redemption Springs, an official letter from the new town council, rescinding Harriet's banishment and offering a formal apology for the injustice she had suffered. Enclosed was a bank draft for the wages she had been denied, plus additional compensation for the harm done to her reputation. "Will you go back?" Owen asked as they sat on the porch that evening, the letter open between them. "To visit, I mean," Harriet considered the question. Once Redemption Springs had been her whole world. Now it was just a place one that held both good and painful memories, but no longer the power to define her. "Someday," she decided. "Not for closure, I've found that already, but to show them who I've become, who we've become together." Owen smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Whatever you want, Mrs. Reed, I'll be right beside you." "Not beside me," she corrected, leaning into his embrace. "With me, there's a difference." A year to the day after their wedding, Harriet gave birth to a daughter, a strong, healthy girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. They named her Hope, a testament to what had sustained them through their darkest times. As Harriet held her daughter, with Owen sitting on the edge of the bed beside them, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the public humiliation of being branded a liar and cast out of her home, to finding unexpected sanctuary with a quiet rancher who saw the truth in her when no one else would. From learning to stand on her own again, to choosing to stand with the man who had helped her find her strength. "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Harriet smiled, looking down at their sleeping daughter and then back to the man who had changed her life. "I'm thinking that sometimes the worst day of your life can lead to the best." Owen leaned forward to kiss her gently. "And I'm thinking that believing in you was the easiest and best decision I ever made." Outside the window, spring was painting the land in vibrant green, promising new beginnings and growth. Inside, a family born of hardship and honesty embraced their future, stronger for having weathered the storms that brought them together. And around Harriet's neck, the carved wooden sparrow still rested a reminder that sometimes the truest treasures come in the simplest forms, and that standing together was always better than standing alone.